Okay, well, look, on Wednesday's program, Brian mentioned Kosovo and what's going on in Kosovo. I thought we should look at that in a little bit more depth. So let's do that. Let's begin with this. KFOR attacked Serbs in Kosovo. There are wounded, bursts of fire, echo, and there's some video. We saw a little bit of video on Wednesday, but tell us what's going on there.
Well, I'll kind of break it down into sections because it's incredibly complex, of course, the entire situation in Kosovo and in Serbia. But effectively, in northern Kosovo, which is still considered by the majority of Serbians to be part of Serbia, and of course, NATO split it away deliberately from Serbia from 1999 onwards. For people to fully understand the history in all its complexity, I highly recommend this interview with Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos and Kivork Almasyan on Syriana Analysis. And I'll just summarize very briefly what Marcus has said in this interview and what he said previously. So what he's explaining is that Aleksandar Vučić, the president of Serbia, is in reality Tony Blair, Israel, and the US man inside Serbia. So therefore, Vučić, whatever he's doing, he's following effectively the NATO roadmap. And that has been the case since October 2000, when there was a coup in Belgrade. And in reality, Western funded, financed, and created Optor took control in Belgrade and has been in control of the leadership in Belgrade since then. Of course, the former Yugoslav army has been decimated by various administrations since 1999. The Yugoslavian army was 120,000 strong. Now, Serbia itself only has an army of between 3,000 to 5,000. Now, what Marcus is saying, and many dissidents and activists in Serbia have told me, Vučić previously was staging the protests in Kosovo to give the impression that basically he supported the reintegration of Kosovo with Serbia. But in reality, that's not true. And he works in collaboration with Albin Kurti, who's the Albanian warlord president of the Kosovo project. And of course, these protests started because effectively in April, elections were held, considered, of course, to be corrupt elections. They were boycotted by 90% of the Serbs living in the area of northern Kosovo. And effectively what has happened in the last few days, the Albanian mayors of four regions or four districts in the northern area of Kosovo, so that's Mitrovica, Zvevkan, Leposavic, Zubin Potok, were appointed. And so these protests, the majority peaceful, were against the raising of the Kosovo flag above the city hall. And this one is in Zvevkan, where 1,000 Serbs gathered in front of the city hall, where these Albanian mayors tried to raise, or their supporters tried to raise, the Kosovo flag. So here, 1,000 Serbs in front of the city hall holding the Serbian flag and protesting peacefully. And of course, what happened was that the violence was ramped up effectively by KFOR, the Kosovo forces, which are effectively described as NATO peacekeepers. So they comprise of NATO member state, soldiers and military. And here is where the claims that there were Russian elements within the protesters, because many of the KFOR vehicles were graffitied over with the Russian Z. But that detracts from the fact that the majority of Serbs, of course, are pro-Russia and anti-NATO for very obvious reasons. NATO bombed the hell out of Serbia in '99, including with depleted uranium, etc. But what is really interesting is that I was also informed that on the day of the mayors taking office, in those 4 districts, Vučić had actually organized with Kurti to bring on Albanian buses many of the Serbs from northern Kosovo to Belgrade for a prearranged rally. So in other words, he was trying to weaken the resistance against the imposition of these Albanian mayors in northern Serbia. And of course, we have to remember that the Albanian factions have, since Kosovo kind of declared illegally or unlawfully its independence in 2008, and even before that, they have carried out reprisals and recrimination against the Serbian population in the north of Kosovo. So I can't remember which video this is, Mike.
That's the protest itself.
Yeah, okay. So these are the actual protests. Now, what is really interesting, again, is that, as I said, people that I spoke to, including Dragana Trifkovic, who heads up the Center for Geostrategic Studies, and you can check out her work and the work of many other Serbian dissidents and academics there. But she told me that basically in the past, Vučić has used criminal elements from inside Serbia, inside Belgrade, that he's relied on to go and put down the resistance protests in Kosovo by the Serbs. Now he's trying, because the US is changing tack, and I'll talk about that in a minute, he's trying to distance himself from those criminal elements. And so in reality, those criminal mafia elements in Belgrade know that their days are numbered. So apparently they went to these areas in Kosovo deliberately to ignite violence against the KFOR and the ROSU, which is the Regional Operational Support Unit. And you can see the guy holding the rifle there. He's part of ROSU, Regional Operational Support Unit. Now, the interesting thing, Mike, ROSU replaced Kosovo Protection Corps. And you might remember that Kosovo Protection Corps was the transformation or the rebranding. Sorry, can we just go back to that image, Mike? Because there's another element on that. So the Kosovo Protection Corps replaced the KLA. Now, the Kosovo Liberation Army, of course, made up of Al-Qaeda and Albanian warlords, was in fact transformed or rebranded by James Le Mesurier, who went on to form the White Helmets, the kind of, again, the rebranding to some extent of Al-Qaeda in Syria. So that's just an interesting connection there. But the guy on the left, now he's actually wearing the badge of the 101st Airborne Brigade. And you'll remember this is an American Special Forces Brigade that is on alert to basically enter Ukraine and to bolster the Ukrainian forces. So what on earth is he doing at these protests in Kosovo? But also the fact that the ROSU guy is holding the rifle suggests that the stories about live ammunition fire against protesters is absolutely verified. And of course, the ROSU elements actually do descend from the Al-Qaeda Albanian warlord factions in 1999. But let's have a look. This is another interesting fact that was told to me by various people, including Dragana. So here the US actually comes out and says that it will restrict cooperation with Kosovo, despite having created the situation in Kosovo in the first place, after ethnic tensions flare up. Now, I've been told by very reliable sources in Serbia that 2 years ago, they were speaking to intelligence factions from the UK, I believe, UK or US, and they were basically telling them that in the future, we're going to change tack. We're actually going to go against Kosovo, and we will start supporting Serbia against Kosovo to try and weaponize Serbia and Serbian popular opinion against Russia. And of course, my contact simply laughed at him because she said, well, that's just never going to happen, because in Serbia, the general sympathy is towards previously the Soviet Union and now for Russia. So here we see this coming to fruition to some degree, the US has outlined punitive actions against Kosovo for stoking ethnic tensions that led to NATO peacekeepers and Serb protesters being injured in the worst clashes taking place in the Balkan country this year. Now, it needs to be mentioned also that what this is doing is giving KFOR the opportunity to send extra security and troops and soldiers to Kosovo. 700 are designated to go to Kosovo in the near future. And here we have Josep Borrell saying we have three clear requests: new local elections now. So in other words, he's saying the elections that elected the Albanian mayors were not acceptable, ensuring the participation of Kosovo Serbs wherein they had allowed the elections to go ahead without that, and to start the work to establish the Association of Serbian Majority Municipalities within EU-facilitated dialogue. Now, that's interesting because that was actually embedded in the Brussels Agreement of 10 years ago. So the fact that they are suddenly digging this up and saying that they're going to focus on it is an indication of their change of tack on Serbia and Kosovo. So worth watching in the future. What does Vučić do immediately after these protests? Well, he heads to the EU summit in Moldova, 12 kilometers more or less from the Ukrainian border, and he meets up with Vladimir Zelensky. Now, after being attacked in Serbian independent media, although there's not very much of that now because he's basically done pretty much what the UK wants to do, and he's shut down most of the opposition media, distant media in Serbia, and has full control over the state media. What he's claiming he's talking about is the subject of sanctions on Russia, which he claims he has objected to. And there you have him shaking hands with Zelensky. And of course, it is known amongst the dissident circles in Serbia that Serbian factions have supplied weapons to Ukraine, so we can speculate quite confidently that perhaps this was also on the table of discussions between them. And then during various press interviews, basically Vučić says that countries from the Open Balkans Initiative will seek greater access to EU funds, so that's a bit of a clue there. There is a big difference. I understand that we are not an EU country, but the difference must be reduced so that we can reach those countries faster. It is an important topic for the summit in June, and what I would say is very important is that I sent an invitation to all countries and the EU leadership and EC representatives that after Grenada and London, one of the next two meetings should be held in Belgrade. That would probably be the biggest summit and a kind of crown of our efforts. So Vučić very clearly lobbying the EU there. He says that he expects to see Scholz and Macron here, and there are some very nice photos of him and Macron hugging in Moldova. And in Belgrade in the next month, we will have countless visits. Morawiecki and the Benelux Troika, the Slovenian president, there will be plenty of them. I also expect a new meeting of the Open Balkans. We will have to work even harder to preserve the interests of Serbia. Well, I would agree. I would argue not the interests of Serbia, the interests of Tony Blair, the UK, the US, and Israel. And he did an interview with La Stampa, the Italian media, and they asked him what will happen to the sanctions against Russia. That is one of the conditions, but you have allegedly refused it. And he replied, for 4 out of 5 UN resolutions, we voted in line with other EU countries. We have no problem supporting the territorial integrity of Ukraine, Crimea, Donbass, Zaporozhye, and Kherson belong to Ukraine. So he's very clearly going against Russian policy in this statement. We condemn aggression. If we are talking about the accession process 6 months before entry, we should be fully aligned with European foreign policy. Well, I think that makes it very clear that he intends to go ahead with putting sanctions on Russia. And let's compare Vučić to the Croatian president, who in his statement, I think it was at a conference in Zagreb, "Glory to Ukraine" is the slogan of chauvinists who killed Jews and Poles. And this was reported in Ukrainian Pravda, so by those that would condemn this kind of statement. And if you move ahead, So he basically said that the slogan "Glory to Ukraine" has the same origin as the cry of the Croatian Ustasha, the extreme right-wing group that operated in the country during World War II. And the background, according to Ukrainian Pravda, the Croatian president has repeatedly made pro-Russian statements before. For example, in January, he called for not comparing the situation in Kosovo with the annexation of Crimea, saying that Crimea would never be Ukrainian territory again. So very interesting juxtaposition there. Croatia benefited from the NATO operations against Serbia, is here coming out openly in support of the Russian special military operation compared to Vucic.
Yeah, okay,